Hi, welcome to Sustain Talks. Today I'm joined by Devi Virdi, Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Centrica, and someone that I know very well. We've worked together over the years, and yeah, it's really, really good to see you and great to have you here. How are you?
I'm well, Sam. Thank you so much. Really lovely to be here as well, and
Yeah.
great to see you after actually quite some time.
I know, it's been far too long, but I accidentally we're both rocking the Centrica colours today, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
But look, I know you, but please share with my audience your experience and background.
really delighted to be here today, Sam. Thanks so much, and just thank you for the opportunity for having me here. And I guess so a bit about myself. So I think it'd be a good opportunity to start sharing, where I've come from professionally, right? And then I can share who I am personally. So professionally, I've been in the hospitality industry, travel tech sector, where Sam and I connected. So I've been in that space for over 25 years, both in HR and in commercial leadership roles. So I've had a number of years of sort of experiencing building out right within the sector across various markets, working for brands such as Marriott and then all the way to Accor hotels. Worked for a tier one European travel tech company where I was MD for Northern Europe. And then, really more recently, pivoting and moving into the nonprofit sector with Women in Hospitality Travel Tech as their group head of D&I, and then really supporting and building out D&I strategies from scratch. So, something that I'm going to say I'm incredibly proud of. On a personal note, I grew up in Hong Kong, so I'm originally from there. And, there was a mantra in my family home, right? Which is something that I still live by today and very much bring it into my own household, my children. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? And it was led by a very fiercely proud Asian mother who really wanted, Sam, her four children, to just have empathy for others, right? And actually leave the world a better place, right? And actually, it's a mantra that has served as my personal North Star. It's guided all my decisions and choices, right? Both big and small. And I would say, actually, because of who my mother was, right, with her beliefs and actually what she dreamed was possible, she never asked anyone for permission, right? And so she showed us what the power of action was and what it truly meant to break down barriers, really. So yeah, that's a bit about who I am and, professionally as well.
Yeah, and for you in your role now, what
Mm.
does diversity, equity, inclusion mean to you and also to Centrica?
Oh, that's a great question. So if I take it from a Centrica lens right now, actually, so our vision within Centrica is that we really want everybody, right? Every person. It's about using their diverse, unique experience, right, and their background to effectively spark solutions, right? It's about creating a better colleague and a customer experience within a sustainable world. And very much so, I think as an organization, we really believe that an inclusive workplace, inclusive products and services are absolutely central to achieving that vision. For me personally, what does diversity and inclusion mean? I think that's a really interesting question. I would definitely say for me, you look, by definition, inclusion is the fundamental cornerstone of a DNA of an organization of my own self-belief. And I think, when you've been in an environment where perhaps you grew up and you've ever felt the fear of rejection, right? The reality of exclusion, not fitting in. Having had that, all those sort of ideas are incredibly real to me. And what do I mean by that? Well, I guess to take it back a step further, um, I still remember the feeling of sitting in a classroom as a young child, with everybody chatting away in English, right? And I hardly understood a word because I grew up in a multi-generational home that spoke Cantonese and Punjabi. And actually, I had I had low self-esteem, and so I didn't have a lot of friends at school. I shied away from drawing attention, right, to myself in class, and frankly, my grades reflected this and my anxiety level, right? So my parents subsequently, at some point further down the line, realized that I needed support, and things did improve. But actually, that again, that fear of rejection that reality of exclusion, it was very real to me. And actually, I've got to say, I'm not alone in having those type of experiences, right? And actually, countless people, Sam, around the world, you know, they have a level of exclusion every single day, right? And whether it's due to your skin color, whether it's your gender, whether it's your accent, right? Your age, your nationality, right? Any one of those range of differences that makes each one of us, incredibly unique, right? For
Yeah.
me, exclusion, Sam, it saps confidence, right? Um, it undermines dreams, right? And actually, it keeps too many talented people living, up to their full potential. So,
Yeah.
and I'm a big believer, right? Experiencing inclusion can stay with you for a lifetime, and actually, costs can be incredibly huge. And actually, personally, I work incredibly hard to fight, through the challenges I had as a child. And I'm really proud that I've taken advantage of the opportunities that offered to me.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what it means to me, right? It is incredibly real to me on an everyday basis. And it's important that, I'm in an environment where I am also able to support my colleagues, right? And actually celebrate, the differences of everybody, because actually our diversity makes us better humans, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. But you've what I've seen you work very, very hard to get to where you are,
Mm,
and to open those doors for yourself. And
mm,
that's not easy for everyone. So being in a position in your organization now where
yeah.
you can help people to do that,
Mm,
and
mm,
maybe they don't see those roads, but you can
mm,
help them get there.
mm.
At Centrica, it's very, very, I assume it's male dominated, right? Being the type of business it is. How
It's
do you change something like that?
it's interesting, right? It's actually interesting what you said. When you're sort of when you have that level of influence, right? And I guess I'm a passionate believer that actually we're all in positions of influence, right? Where we can be part of positive change, right? But I've seen the value that this can bring to organizations. So even from a minor level, right? So when you're talking about just implementing things differently, learn to look and try new ways. Think about the biases, right? How do you mitigate that? Just seeing the impact this has, and actually that ROI, so that return on investment, that little investment that was put in, what it means for the organization and how it can drive value, which is far beyond a P&L, right? And it's not only it is the right thing to do, but when you see it impacting in the green, and people in organizations react to this. But this is what gets me up every day, right? And that's actually for my children who will go into a world where people actually are celebrated for their differences, right? Because it goes back to that piece, our diversity is our strength. And actually there is so much evidence out there, right? When you talk about what comes first in an organization, is it diversity or is it inclusion, right? Well, actually, diverse teams drive better performance, they drive better progress, right? They're more agile, they have high engagement and productivity, and all this is important, right? But actually what's more important is about doing the right thing. And I think it's so critical that people feel comfortable in their own skin, right? I think that's so important. You've got to give equal opportunity to progress in any environment and community, right? And actually for Centrica, so this is the key, right? Inclusion is an absolute key differentiator here, right? It's about, for us as an organization, it's about behaviors, it's about values, and it's about how those values actually manifest themselves, right? Through leadership. So from top down, and now really, for us, it's looking at that bottom up piece. So it's bringing the both together. And I think without a workplace of inclusion, right? Actually diversity is really doomed to fail.
Yeah.
And that's it, because then colleagues don't feel safe, right, to share and be transparent. And they don't feel that they can bring their best selves to work, right? And when it comes to creating, Sam, an environment where of inclusion, the reality is an organization, you're either leading the way or you're getting in the way. Neutral just doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? And actually, everyone wants to be in a workplace where they're just valued and they're respected, right? They want to be able to go to work in that type of environment. So inclusion actually for us as a business, it's not an optional extra, right? Actually, it's the key to driving better diversity. And I've got to say, I'm incredibly proud to work for a company, that knows its purpose, and recognizes that everyone's voice matters, right? And actually wants to build an inclusive and a diverse workplace, because business success requires this.
Yeah. I totally agree, and it has to come from the top, but I like the way that you talk about that bottom up as well.
Yeah.
And for you coming into a company like that, I guess you have to change a lot of people's ways, and having those kind of conversations about religion, about politics, about sexual orientation, race, that's going to be quite challenging. There's going to be a lot of companies out there that don't know how to approach those kind of conversations with people that they're not used to having these conversations. So how do you do that?
Really great question. I think something that I think that Centrica is incredibly privileged to have, right, is we currently have just over 6 colleague-led networks. So basically, some of your viewers may know of them as employee resource groups, so ERGs. At Centrica, we call them colleague-led networks, right? We have networks ranging from our Centrica Women's Network, Carers Network, our Forces Network, our network for working parents, our network for our diverse colleagues, right? Our networks for our LGBTQ plus colleagues. So really sort of a multitude of, networks where, individuals across the business, and we've got, in excess of sort of 6 or 7 different business units, that where they're seeking for support, where they're seeking for, understanding, and there's a genuine affinity, these networks are really there, right? There's a genuine empathy, right? So this is where you have the opportunity to be open, right? They support with resources, with sort of learning, awareness, and I think it goes back to that foundation of when you talk about how do you build an inclusive workplace environment, right? And actually, these are the fundamental building blocks when you talk about building a culture of inclusion. And actually, it's one of our core pillars right now that we're looking to achieve. The fact that we have, in excess of 6 colleague-led networks, it supports all our colleagues' day-to-day's requirements, right? From actually having these type of dialogues. So for example, if I give you an example, Voice, which is our network that really supports our ethnic diverse colleagues, right? During Black History Month, they will talk about topics with regards to race, right? What it means to have, trying to get comfortable with these uncomfortable topics for some of our colleagues, which is about, what does racism mean, right? How do you make sure that you understand what the topics of microaggression, right? How do you be an ally, right, in this space, right? How do you come together? And for us, it's ultimately, it's about, as a person, right, how can you make a difference? Well, actually, there's 3 things, right? Show up. So actually show up to these conversations, because the reality is they're going to be uncomfortable, right? There's also a piece, Sam, about educating oneself, right? Yeah. And actually also contribute to the learning, right, as part of growing, right? So if you're going to bring in these topics of conversation. Second bit is about speak up, all right? So speak up to challenge, which also means if you're going to make a statement, make sure you've got some key points, right? Data points, actually. And also if you see something that's wrong, say something.
Yeah.
Right? Because actually, in the whole piece about allyship, being a bystander is even worse, right? Yeah. And then finally, stand up. So genuinely stand up for what's right. And we sort of really promote, a whole piece about psychological safety. So don't be afraid to be controversial.
Yeah.
Right, within our organization, right? So stand up if you believe it's right. Stand up and don't be afraid to be controversial. Yeah. And this is where the support of the colleague-led networks and line managers actually is really critical, to have these type of dialogues. And I guess if I think about last year, some of the works that actually our networks have done. Our Spectrum, our LGBT plus network, they brought out, working with our legal team, working with our wider HR team, guidelines to really support colleagues who are transitioning, right, within the workplace. I mean, that's fundamentally for me so incredibly forward. Secondly, with our well-being team, we also supported, bringing in our menopause guidelines, right?
Yeah.
So meaning that actually line managers have a better understanding of what it means when your colleagues are going through such a pivotal moment, right? In their time, their lifetime. How can you support as a line manager? What does it mean to you, as an individual going through this? And actually, even on the flip side, the great thing is when you've got leaders who really, elevate this, right? Elevate the topics, right? Whether it's through town hall conversations where we have our Centrica leadership team who really share, who really bring this to the platform. And this is all part of how you start bringing some of these topics, right, to the forefront. That
Yeah.
really is about, the power of inclusion at the end of the day.
Yeah, I have to say at this point, I watched your amazing CEO, Chris O'Shea, speak about menopause. And, to have a leader like that, talking about a conversation that, it was a bit taboo before to have those kind of conversations. Honestly, that is what leadership looks like. Must be amazing working with somebody like that.
Sam, I feel incredibly privileged to be working, with Chris, with Jill, who's our Chief People Officer, with the wider Centrica leadership team, right? And why? Because actually, so Chris for me, Chris and Jill and the wider, leadership team, they are incredibly authentic, right? They don't just believe that it's about, and definitely for him, it's not just the right thing to do, right? It is also essential for our business, right? Because it's about supporting our customers. It's about supporting our colleagues, right? And actually, as a leadership team, they recognize that actually we need the best team, right, in order to do the best work, right? And that, what does that mean? That means we've got to have a diverse mix of people and skills, because ultimately, those individuals can then not only understand, you can deliver for our customers, but actually going back to your point about, Chris and him speaking about, menopause, you're absolutely right. There aren't many leaders who will go on LinkedIn and just be as authentic, as oneself as he is. And for me, that demonstrates, what authentic leadership is in my books, right? And with that, I feel incredibly privileged to be working alongside him and the wider leadership team.
Yeah, it's really great. I just want to talk a little bit about equality and equal pay, because I still think that there's still some struggles. It might be that maybe if somebody's gone off to have a baby and then they've come back and they haven't got the same opportunities, and especially, just been through 2 years of COVID with a lot of redundancies and people are trying to find their way back into work. What are your views on equal pay, and how do you think companies can manage that?
So if I share it from our business lens, right now, I think from a Centrica lens. So, I think actually we currently uphold, well, equal pay. It's a legal requirement, right, in the UK, and actually we do just that. And for us, so if you look at our equal pay, and we're actually just about to publish our 2021 pay gap, right? So both gender pay gap and actually our ethnicity pay gap. And it's something that obviously for us, it's incredibly important to be transparent. It's about holding ourselves accountable, Sam, right, within this space. When comparing actually pay across equivalent roles, because that's what equal pay is, we actually have a negligible gap, which then demonstrates that actually we pay our colleagues fairly. And so for us, I think, and we use the Hey Job evaluation methodology, right? It's about standardizing job grading. And so we run equal pay audits amongst, those and other activities annually, right? And it's incredibly important to make sure that for us that's there. But I think as a sector, I think we also do have, what I would say a long way to go, right? We've got a big pay gap itself to tackle, right? But we're actually, as an organization, we need to tackle stereotypes, right? And
Yeah.
actually, you know, and what I mean by that is as a business, you know, we have quite a large workforce, which is heavily with that. You know, if I shared with you, you know, right now, if I looked at our engineering population, 2% of our engineers are women, right? 2%. Yeah. And so for us, it's more about how do you inspire, right? Those underrepresented groups, right, Sam? So going back to, you know, women, right, to be the engineers of tomorrow, right? And then actually, so whilst our gap isn't materially, you know, impacted by us having less women, you know, then we'd like, let's say in our senior leadership, right, and wider team, we know we have to work really hard, you know, to change that engineering space, right? Because it's about really then supporting, you know, reflecting the wider diversity of our communities, right? And look, you know, it is going to be a challenge. It is definitely that's something that's going to take time. It's not something that's going to be a quick fix, right? You know, I think yes, whilst we have the gap because we've got, you know, women more in highly skilled, you know, men, sorry, in highly skilled and sort of those well-paid engineering jobs, it's more about how do we bring in, you know, more women into the space, right?
It's a longer term,
Huge.
You have to start from the very young age of inspiring younger children to see that as an option.
So these are some of the works that we've done, you know, over the last couple of years, where we've been working with charities like, for example, with Tech She Can, right? So really going into schools and really sort of, you know, sharing with them the role models, right? The sort of female role models in our organization, and what does it mean to young children when can they inspire? Do they look up and see that actually engineering, you know, roles in technology, you know, so really the STEM subjects, right? And an area that really that they can pivot towards. I think that's so important. You know, I think and also I think, you know, one of the things is when you look at it actually, I think we realize that as the UK sort of largest field force employer, right, of basically heating installers and service and repair engineers, you know, we knew that we weren't doing enough to overturn, right? You know, I'm talking 2 years ago, these long-standing stereotypes, right, that shaped the type of jobs people typically do. And actually, if we didn't face up to this and help address it, then we wouldn't also be able to close our own pay gap, right? So we've joined forces with alliances like, in fact, last year with the Powerful Women Energy Leaders Coalition that Chris is part of. So, you know, as part of a CEO-led coalition, it's really about working together and tackling this issue as a sector, right?
I mean, obviously the last few years has been difficult. A lot has come to light about diversity and inclusion, and you know, we are starting to see things change. But do you think it's enough, and do you think it's going quick enough? What do you think about the changes that are taking place?
It's interesting you say that. I think, look, I guess to sort of go back a bit, 2020, right? Because it is that far back, right? Frankly, was a year like no other. I think it goes without saying that COVID-19, right, has brought tremendous change, right? It's brought upheaval into all our work lives, right? But exactly that, another major change of that year was about increasing the push to prioritize, right? Inclusion, diversity within the workspace, right? And look, actually, Sam, one thing I will definitely say, inclusion is a tough and it's a complex journey, actually, with truths that we still don't face, right? And let's be honest, we are really uncomfortable with the truth that we're really uncomfortable, right, with difference. Right. But in society and actually in business, we need to own that truth, right? Because that's part of being human. And because if we don't own it, frankly, we're not going to get over it. And actually the best thing for me about just being, you know, a human is the one thing that we have in common. Look, we are all different, right? And I think if I think back to your question is, are we moving things fast enough? What's really interesting is actually through the last 2 years, right, in this devastating time, right? Of course, the idea that, injustices, inequalities are wrong, right, and change is needed, it's nothing new. But actually, the shift that I have seen, it's been phenomenal, right? And it's now an absolute expectation that they have to be corrected.
Yeah.
It's not in the future through sort of slow, considered change, but it's about right now. It's about through fast, accelerated change, right? And these expectations are incredibly powerful and magnetic. I mean, I've seen it in our own organization, right? It's about how are we making sure that, we are driving this across all our business units, and that we're also challenging, right, our leaders throughout the organization, right? And look, tragic events such as, the deaths that took place in the US, which triggered that entire global response and put Black Lives Matter, the movement at the center of the world stage, Sam, and also the realization that actually mental health and well-being, right?
Yeah.
It's a tangible issue. These have been absolute powerful undercurrents, right, that completely contributed to amplifying genuine expectations of organizations. So it is incredibly real, and actually the pace of where we are now in this space, it's accelerating, and it's going to continue to do so because the expectations of society are. And as well as, you've got talent coming in the door, right, who are of a younger generation, who are also, it's an absolute given for them, right, that they want to make sure that they're walking into a workspace that they see representation, they see the diversity, right? Things have really changed monumentally, over the last 2 years, and for all the right reasons. But I'm also, I'm also in that sort of somewhat, I guess my idea is that we've still got a long way to go, right? So we're there, but we've still got a long way to go. Some sectors are ahead of others, right? Having come into the energy sector, look, I think there's definite movement that we need to continue to driving, particularly on the gender piece. But I think you cannot forget everything else, right? Because it's not just about, our women talent. It's everything else that goes alongside with it. And I think, you show up not just as a female, you show up as a mother, right? I show up as an Asian a woman, right? So there's all the other intersectionalities that I bring to the table, and I want to make sure, my employer recognizes that.
Yeah, I definitely have seen from the conversations that I have a lot of these kind of conversations, and the businesses are making it a priority.
Yeah.
But there is still a long way to go. What would your advice be for a company that, there's still a lot of companies that haven't tackled this at all? And if they were going to start somewhere, what would your advice be for them to say, let's get diversity and inclusion on the table? Where should they start?
That's a great question. I think, if you're going to start somewhere, I think as a first point, listen to your colleagues, listen to your employees, right? Understand what is actually happening within the organization. I think that is where that is absolutely key, right? You've got to know what are your colleagues feeling, right? Because actually without a culture of inclusion, right, if your colleagues don't feel safe to share and be transparent, you're not going to be able to bring in that diversity that you want to be, right? I think secondly, if you're sort of at a starting point, is take the ownership, right? Commitment has to start, right, with leadership, right? And actually, I believe inclusive culture and actually inclusive leadership, they're intrinsically linked, right? And if you're looking to ingrain inclusion within an organization's DNA, it starts with commitment from the leadership team. It's about setting the right tone, because that gains momentum quickly, right? And it also builds an environment where everyone can then excel. You can speak truth to power, right? Then you can make those long-term sort of commitments, right? Whatever that looks like in your organization, regardless of how big or small your organization is, Sam, right? You could be in a startup environment and you could still do this. You could be in a FTSE organization and you could still do this. But your starting point is about listening to your colleagues. It's understanding, where are the challenges in your business? What does that look like, right? And what are the key points that your colleagues want you to really start acting on? So it's like, taking a health check, right? And you've got to look at the internal organs of your business and go, right, where does the work come into play? And once you're able to start looking at that, tackling that, then it's about the external piece. And the external piece is that customer piece, because actually that's where diversity inclusion is completely linked. It always goes back towards your customer, right? Because ultimately, it's about making the right choices to support your business at the end of the day, because it makes great business sense, right? And I think, the work for any organization, it exists. Why? Because actually exclusion has been, you've allowed exclusion to happen, right? And actually lack of commitment and being vague is actually part of the reason we're in this position in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so well said and so important. We're going to finish now, and I always finish this on this question, but who inspires you?
Wow. I think that's quite an easy question for me, Sam. Actually, my mother has always been she's been a strong female role model in my life. She's one of the people that's always encouraged me to speak up, explore my interest, right? And that included a very young age when I left home at 18 to travel, go abroad to study, right, in Australia. And then when I arrived in the UK, she supported me, as I sort of took risks and really pursued new opportunities, right? And actually having that honest sounding board at every step of my personal and professional journey has been incredibly important to me. And she taught me, look, never to be afraid to be the first, but actually always make sure you're not the last, right? And I say that because she was the first Asian Sikh woman in the Hong Kong police force, right, in the 70s. So,
Wow.
she's a change maker, and she really taught me what the power of action is. Yeah. So she's my role model, Sam.
Wow, what a woman. Devi, you are somebody that inspires me. I knew this would be a great conversation, and we are so thrilled that you're going to be joining us at the Responsible Futures Conference and sharing more. But thank you for now so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation, and I hope that companies can learn from what you've shared, and I really appreciate you, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sam. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.